I was struck by, again, either the naivety, the willful blindness, the hubris of some parts of our cultural community to say, oh, this is freedom of speech. There is a huge difference between paid propaganda from malicious states and informed freedom of speech in a democracy. And if we don't understand the difference, and if we don't get a fulsome understanding of how Russian propaganda works, what its purpose is, how it happens here, we have a real problem.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of On the Edge with Philip Ittner. Our guest this week is Canadian Senator Stan Kutcher, who first came to my attention during a controversy at the Toronto International Film Festival. A Russian piece of propaganda of information warfare posing as a documentary was scheduled to be shown, but due to the efforts of the senator and those like-minded, it was rightfully removed. Senator Kutcher is himself a descendant of Ukrainian immigrants because, whether you know it or not, there are long-standing ties that go back well over a century between Canada and Ukraine, because every time they've had a chance, Ukrainians have fled Moscow's aggression and its tyranny only to find a new home in Canada. So there's lots to talk about, from the controversy to the current war to Canada's and the West's support, or lack thereof, for the Ukrainian war effort. Senator Kutcher, thank you for joining us. I became aware of you firstly, and I think we should tackle this topic straight out the gate here before we talk a little bit about Canada-Ukrainian relationships. You came to my attention because of the Toronto International Film Festival, in which there was a film that had been put together by a Russia Today correspondent, and I put that in quotation marks because Russia Today does not put out journalism, it puts out propaganda. They had a film in which this RT journalist, again quotes, was embedded, again quotes, with the Russian army on the other side of the line, and of course trying to humanize a military that has been conducting war crimes since the full-scale invasion started and even before that. What was your experience with that festival and getting that film pulled?
Well, a couple of things. Maybe I could start at the sort of larger area and then hone in on the smaller one. The modern day version of propaganda that Russia has been using against Western countries, Western democracies, has a substantive history. It's very different than the kind of propaganda we saw during the Cold War. And it moved into what people call soft or sharp propaganda, designed to create divisions in democratic societies, to pit people in democratic societies against each other, and in so doing work to destabilize democratic societies. It's part of a larger destabilizing effort that's going along with other autocratic kleptocracies such as China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia. So many Canadians have absolutely no idea about this. Many just had no idea whatsoever. It first came to my attention in about 2013, 2014 in my work in mental health. I'm a physician, a psychiatrist, and I was doing work on improving mental health for young people, and I began to notice some very unusual material coming through electronically, through social media primarily, but in other places as well. And it was very focused on the anti-vaccination movement. And at that time, I got interested in that, and then I realized that a lot of this that we were seeing was actually Russian propaganda coming in very different kind of ways. Through journalists who either knew better or didn't care to know better, through academics in the Vladi group that Putin organized. He either should have known better or didn't care to know better, or were frankly just doing their thing, parroting Kremlin talking points. And through a whole host of social media channels, and as it's turned out, there has been a Canadian company, a large one, Tenet Media, which has taken Kremlin propaganda and just spread it all across Canada. So for me, when I saw this about this film, it was clear Russian propaganda. No journalist in Russia is independent. No journalist
No.
is embedded in the Russian military, wears a uniform of a Russian soldier, and gets the Russian authorities
For
to
7 months.
yeah, and gets
Yeah.
the Russian authorities to upload all her files, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into all that. I was struck by, again, either the naivety, the willful blindness, the hubris of some parts of our cultural community to say, oh, this is freedom of speech. There is a huge difference between paid propaganda from malicious states and informed freedom of speech in a democracy. And if we don't understand the difference, and if we don't get a fulsome understanding of how Russian propaganda works, what its purpose is, how it happens here, we have a real problem. So for me, this film was a real wake up, telling me that I had to get involved in both in the wider public sphere and more again in my own work in the Senate. So that was what galvanized my activities on this film.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you point that out, your history with mental health, because it is almost an insidious attack on our psyche, what the Russians do when it comes to propaganda. And you mentioned Tenet there as well. The sooner we in North America, obviously with this crucial vote coming up in the United States, if we do not wake up to the fact that our minds are under attack, our sense of the world around us is being attacked, because that's what Russia does. It doesn't. The aim is not to prove you of a contrary belief. The aim is to destabilize your sense
Right.
of reality. So
Mm-hmm.
there is no truth. And that's very disturbing. It's interesting that you bring this up, because I did want to talk to you about this. What attacks, you mentioned Tenet there, but what attacks have you seen in Canada? Because Moscow does target Canada with intent.
Oh, of course. Yeah, there's also a history to that. So in the
Yes.
1950s, we had the Guzenko affair, where we had the cipher clerk in the Russian embassy coming with all the stuff that had been stolen. And I think it took 3 times for him to visit the RCMP, and then only he got a tip that Russian agents were coming to his home. He hid in another home. And only after that did Canada take notice. I mean, Western democracies have been asleep at the switch for a while. And I think after the end of the Cold War, people felt, okay, whew, that's all over, no more. Russia's going to be nice
I
from
got
now
that
on.
sense as well,
They have
yes.
no idea that Russia is an empire and that the purpose of empire is to take over other places. And they also don't understand this pure Slav Russian, uh, uh, almost eugenic kind of framework that is so prevalent in Russia. They don't understand that Russian values are not the Bolshoi ballet. That Russian values are very, very different from the values that we hold as foundational to our Western democracies. Completely different. And they have very limited understanding of the long-standing genocidal interventions by Russia in Ukraine.
Yes.
Those of us who have Ukrainian roots, my grandparents and parents came here after World War II as refugees. We lost everything on both sides of the family, everything. Family members murdered, all the land taken, everything. There is no love lost, and people understand how Russia works. In Canada, when people think about Russia, lots of people think, oh, the ballet, oh, they play ice hockey, they got a good hockey team, you can get some borscht, which is actually Ukrainian, not Russian, but they get us all mixed up anyway. So there is this naivety in the West, and we're so protected from it that Russia has taken advantage of that. And I think you're absolutely right. The purpose is to sow so much confusion and to turn people in democracies against each other on the basis of that confusion. Now, that being said, I must tell you that I have some substantive concerns that in some countries, not so much in Canada, but if I look to our neighbors to the south, I think Russian influence has gone way beyond just destabilizing ideas in democracies. There is no way that Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin aren't like this. And Anne Applebaum, who's a writer for The Atlantic, recently published a
Yes,
book,
well
which
known.
Autocracy Incorporated, outstanding. She's hit it right on the head. So we're living in a time when, even in our own country, we find that political debates used to be very much about policy. You know, I want higher taxes, I want lower taxes, I want to take my tax dollars and put them towards this type of program, I want to take tax dollars, put it to that kind of program. That policy thing, you know, tweaking where the country's going, but still fundamentally sharing the same values. What I've seen in the last 8 years, more so in the last 4, is a pulling together away from policy debates to values-based arguments. And Russia is superb at poking that bear, pardon the metaphor. You know, LGBTQ rights. There are no LGBTQ rights in Russia. And so Russia pokes that and pokes that and pokes that. So that's just a simple example. The anti-vaccine movement in Canada has been highly infiltrated for years and years by Russian propaganda. Again, people fighting with each other.
You're 100% right. And it worries me because, you know, the greatest trick that the old saying, the greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing the world it wasn't real. You know, he wasn't real. There has been an effort, a concerted effort in the United States, and I want to see if maybe it's in Canada as well, that there's a pushback against the fact, if you look at what's happening, there's, you know, that Moscow concertedly has an information warfare campaign that we have been under attack, literally under attack in our body politic, in our civil society, in our media for years and years. But they have made it so, especially with the whole Russia, 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 because the Mueller report came out badly in the States. I wonder if you're seeing it as well. This kind of like, oh, you guys, you see, you know, GRU or KGB or FSB or, you know, S3R, all the Russian intelligence agents behind every tree, and so it's easily dismissed. Do you have that problem in Canada? Because we sure have it in the States.
In Canada, we have a bit of it, but not so much. I think there are sort of, if I could look at it, 3 or 4 different categories that I would put Canadian society in general in. And then I hate to do that because it's such a large generalization. But I would
It's
say
diverse, and yeah, absolutely.
the
Love your country.
vast majority of Canadian people haven't got a clue what's happening. They haven't got a clue. They wouldn't know a piece of propaganda that hit them between the eyes, because it's done so subtly. It's done through media influencers. It's done through journalist influencers. It's done through academics, and it sort of gradually seeps in and pervades the culture. If you think of having a glass of water just sitting there on your desk, and you take a little droplet of red food dye and drop it in, it sort of spreads really quietly, and then it diffuses into the whole water, and the water turns red. You haven't even realized it's turned red. I think that's the vast majority of Canadians. We do have a group of Canadians who are knowingly taking money to do Kremlin talking points. And they're showing up, sometimes with politicians, at these events that are divisive events. The trucker freedom convoy, so-called freedom convoy that happened in Ottawa. Various groups with groups that are committed to militarily destabilizing the country. Small groups, but nonetheless. And we're starting to see some of that. It has also been tidied up as academic freedom. So some academics that are very involved in the Valdi Club, for example, are constantly putting out pro-Russian, almost identical Kremlin talking points. And then we have the bot campaigns. It's interesting, sometimes when I put on Twitter, I hate calling it X, but it's because X and Twitter are so completely different, which itself has become a propaganda tool for Russia. When I put some stuff out there that is critical of Russia or is pushing a particular point that needs to be addressed in Canada politically, I get bot bombed. And it's just like this. So it's very sophisticated. It's out there and it's moving. And I think we're still not at a full and deep understanding of how insidious this kind of intervention is. The onion is being peeled layer by layer. There is a study now in the House of Commons looking at Russian disinformation and propaganda by Commons Committee. I've proposed a study like that in the Senate as well for a Security and Defense Committee. We have an election interference commission, which is looking at direct interference in elections by a number of malignant state actors, not just Russia. But that commission is starting to broaden its perspective because they're realizing that, yes, we may have election interference from malignant state actors in Canada, but the whole interference goes way, way beyond elections, way beyond elections. So and then there is a dedicated, very, very thorough, hardworking group of academics and some journalists who have made this an issue that they are focusing on. So, for example, Professor Marcus Kolga at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, who runs an organization called Disinformation Watch, has been outstanding in trying to bring many of these issues to our attention, and there are more of them. So I think that that's how basically we fit in. Certainly amongst my colleagues, there is greater and greater understanding and awareness of this. We're parliamentarians in the Senate. We're not elected. We're appointed. But that gives us a long runway so that we're not dependent on election cycles, and that we are able to, once we get topics that people are interested in, we can delve into them very, very deeply. We can get a fulsome understanding of it, and we can keep the pressure on. So I'm pleased to see some of that coming. It's late. It's probably a little bit too little as well. You know, the best time to have done something about this was a decade ago. The next best time is right now. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, well, that's important because it's also, I want to point out to those who don't know, maybe, is that there is a massive Ukrainian diaspora living in Canada. 1.5 million, I believe, Canadians
Yeah, around that. Yeah.
have Ukrainian ancestry.
Yeah, it's about
Yeah,
3.5% or 4% of the entire Canadian population. It's the largest single diaspora outside of Canada, outside of Ukraine and Russia. So it's the largest group of
yeah.
Ukrainian people outside of Canada and Russia.
And it is interesting to note that this is not a new thing.
No.
Ukrainians have been fleeing to Canada since the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. We see several waves of this happening, but all the waves, except for this current one, were when Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And there were these waves whenever the Russian Empire became weak, say at the end of the Tsarist era,
Yep.
During the Second World War, the collapse of the Soviet Union. You see these massive waves of Ukrainians running as fast as they can away from Moscow's rule. And they're running to Canada. What does that say about Moscow's way of governance, and what does that say about a liberal democracy like Canada?
Well, you know, the bottom line is you don't want to stay where you're not welcome, or you don't want to stay where someone's going to steal your land and shoot your friends. That's pretty basic stuff, right? However, Canada has been seen from the very beginning as a land of opportunity and a safe haven. And if we look back, you're absolutely correct. The first big wave of Ukrainian settlers came about 125 years ago to open up the Canadian West. They were recruited here by Clifford Sifton, who was then Minister of Interior in that government. Strong men in sheepskin coats, I think was the phrase. They left out the women who actually carried the culture and did lots of hard work themselves, but that was that time. And really, the Canadian West and the Canadian as a global agricultural powerhouse could not have been built without Ukrainians. The other interesting thing that some of your viewers may not realize is that Ukrainian culture and indigenous culture merged. And there are some fascinating designs. The Kokum design, Kokum, is a fusion between Ukrainian art and indigenous art, and it's absolutely stunning. There's a long history between Ukrainians and indigenous peoples and Métis peoples, actually, which is now becoming rediscovered, which is fantastic, and it's a very positive history.
Yeah.
So we've been around for a while
Well,
here.
I can see some similarities there. I can see some similarities between First Nation people feeling maybe that they are being colonized and Ukrainians who have a long history of colonization by Moscow.
Yeah,
There is
good
a
point.
common through line there.
I think that's a very, very good point. And the there is again, partly as a result of, I would think, the Russians' illegal genocidal war on Ukraine, there has been a rediscovery of this tradition. And now I can go to the Bioware Market in Ottawa, and there is a indigenous store that sells indigenous materials, and there are the kokum scarves, and there are the kokum ties in those designs.
Oh, I'm gonna have to look into getting me some of those.
Send
That sounds
send me
fantastic.
send me your
I was
address.
not aware.
Send me your
I
address.
certainly
I'll send you one.
thank you so much, Senator. I mean, it is important to note the contribution that Ukrainians have made to Canada down through the years. And, one of the things that moves me, it comes up in my algorithm upon occasion, is the scene from, I believe is it the Winnipeg, it's the Jets, isn't it? The
Yeah, the
Winnipeg
Winnipeg
Jets.
Jets, a hockey
There's
team. Yeah,
this incident where the choir, a Ukrainian choir of, I don't think it's Winnipeg, but of maybe Canada or wherever they had come from, that sang the Ukrainian national anthem, and the entire stadium rose to their feet in respect. And it moves me every time I see that. That's a beautiful expression of solidarity.
True North and the Winnipeg Jets express heartfelt support for Ukraine and for more than 180,000 Ukrainian Canadians living in Manitoba. And now, to perform tonight's anthems, please welcome back Husli Ukrainian Male Chorus.
Do you think Canadians have reinvigorated or have had that consciousness of the contribution of what Ukrainians have given to Canada? Is that being reinvigorated, especially with now these refugees that are finding solace there?
yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's complex at so many levels. So let me just try to bash at that a bit. Speaking of the
As
Winnipeg,
things Ukrainian and Russian tend to be very complicated, and immigration and all the rest of it. But yes,
yeah.
let's try and
Well,
simplify it.
let's start if the best we can, realizing that simplicity doesn't always mean clarity. But
True. Let's clarify this, shall we?
that we have the Winnipeg Jets actually have a new emblem which incorporates Ukrainian design into the emblem. It just was released a couple of weeks ago. And my cousin Mark actually played NHL hockey for both Winnipeg and the Toronto Maple Leafs for many years. There is another Ukrainian. Not he wasn't quite as good as Wayne Gretzky, who was Ukrainian, probably known worldwide, but he did play in the
That's
NHL
right.
for
Yeah.
15 or 20 years. Yes, I think what has happened. I mean, the Ukrainians have always been here, and in some ways, they have maintained some of the traditional Ukrainian culture in Canada, culture which was under attack by Russia. The Russification, again, not known by Ukrainians. In fact, not known by a lot of Soviet historians in Canada. The Russification of Ukraine came at a great price, changing the language, focusing on Russian education, pushing down the culture, changing the church. We all know about that, but the Canadians really didn't know about it. And Ukrainian culture was sort of an interesting thing. They loved the food. They were amazed by the dance, the Shumka dancers, the Chernovish company in Edmonton, for example, out there. Just that, but that was sort of like it for Canadians. With the war, there's been a whoa. This is something. They make up about 4% of our population. This is really something big. And I actually have a bill that just got through committee in the Senate. It's coming back for third reading, which proposes the month of September every year as Ukrainian Heritage Month. And because the first Ukrainians that came about 125 years ago arrived in September. So we're going to try to get it out of the Senate fast and into the House and out of the House. And it's it's just like a reawakening of awareness about Ukraine as its own nation that is
Mm.
happening in Canada, which, because it was off the radar. But Canada was the first country that when Ukraine announced its independence in 1991, Canada was the first country to recognize Ukrainian independence. So it's not as if we haven't been aware of some of this, but it is becoming a reawakening. And I myself am an example of that. I grew up in small rural towns in Ontario, primarily, where we were the only family that ever spoke Ukrainian, and we spoke it
Mm.
in the home occasionally. And as we stayed in the English, it was English countryside, we lost more and more of the Ukrainian. And my only people that I spoke Ukrainian with were my baba and Jido, and they lived in
Mm.
Toronto, and I would see them 3 or 4 times a year. So I quickly lost that. With the war, I started to actually become even more interested in my own culture and regain that. Started to go back and learn to speak Ukrainian. The last that I spoke, I was about 6 years old, and I'm probably at an 8-year-old level now. So I'm moving up, and it's great. I'm becoming much more aware of my own cultural history, and we're starting to see that develop amongst Ukrainians who have sort of been second and third generation Ukrainians here, and have sort of moved away from the tight Ukrainian community that has existed for a long time. So we're starting to see that spread. And as people become more aware of, there's the hockey players, there's the artists like Kurlek.
Mm.
Roberta Bonder was the first woman to walk in space as Ukrainian Canadian. But on the political side, we've had some pretty impressive people. We had Governor General, premiers of provinces, and Senator Paul Yutsik, who preceded me in the Senate by quite
Ah.
a bit. He is considered to be the father of Canadian multiculturalism. He was the guy who said, look, Canada is more than just English and French. Canada is this mosaic of all these cultures that bring to the country this incredible richness. And one of the things about Canada is we are rich because we are diverse. It causes us problems, but it also is a strength. And the better that we understand the diversity and the unity that we can have in our diversity, the better kind of a country we will become as long as we continue to maintain our core values. And that's what the Canadian multicultural mosaic is about, different than the American melting pot. Okay, it's the
I
multicultural
find
mosaic.
that I find that fascinating because that's a very Ukrainian sensibility. Because they have been forced to be multicultural in many ways because empires have crossed through here so many times that they've had to find ways to accommodate one another. It's as it's been I've said it many times before. Ukraine became multicultural because empires crossed through here. Russia became multicultural through conquest, and it's a
Yes.
very different way
Yeah.
of gaining that. So I'm not surprised it would be a Ukrainian that would champion that in Canada. How are the current refugees, the guys who are running away from this awful war here? I know they're finding a home in Canada, but how's that going? Are they still being warmly received? Are they integrating? How's that process going?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I don't have solid data. I know many people in that wave. It's part of the Ukraine Safe Haven program that Canada created. It's a bit of a challenge because the question is this a temporary program or is it permanent? Is there a pathway to permanent residency through here to Canadian citizenship? Yes or no? Unclear. Some making applications, some not. Some people who have come have gone back because their families are still there. They wanted to be with their families. Some people have come and stayed and have integrated very, very well into the Canadian society as Ukrainian Canadians, or as into they have jobs. They're making a contribution. They're paying taxes. They're doing some fantastic work. Actually, I have a person that works for me in my office on a part-time basis who was part of that Safe Haven group. Helps me with a lot of the work I'm doing with the Ukrainian diaspora community. So, and many other people have their children are in school, or they have children who have been born here. And so this is going to be a bit of a challenge for us to figure out how to make sure that we are helpful to the people who have come here, some of whom are really wanting to stay and make Canada their home, others who have mixed loyalties. Some want to go back, some don't want to go back. It's not something that I can predict. It's something that will work out. Certainly, the longer that Russia's war on Ukraine continues, the more challenging it will be for people to go back and reintegrate. I know there's a huge wish to have people come back who have skills and are skills that are needed in Ukraine for rebuilding, reconstruction. I don't know how that's going to turn out.
Yeah.
By and large, the people from Ukraine who have come here in this safe haven program have been very welcomed. Not all,
It's
but by
it's
and large.
my it's my I know it's a concern here that the longer this war goes on and the longer people integrate into the communities where they have found safe haven, that they may lose the desire to return. And there will be a massive need for
Yes.
people to come back because after this war is over, because no war lasts forever, there's going to be a massive rebuilding and also building a new country. I mean, this is going to be a new liberal democracy, a powerhouse potentially on the European continent by sheer size. I know you say you don't have data, but in your work with the diaspora, is there a tipping point that's happening? What's your gut telling you when you talk to the diaspora that's come recently, whether or not they're going to stay or whether or not they're going to come home?
Well, I've heard both perspectives, and I think a lot of that is very individual. Whenever we look at uh, going somewhere else, there are push factors and pull factors. And so the question, the push factor from people leaving Ukraine to come to Canada is pretty clear. Though there were some pull factors because some of the people who came from Ukraine to Canada when the war began actually had ties in Canada already. They were working.
Mm,
They were for them there was this pull factor as well as the push. Some of that group have strong pull factors going back. Elderly parents, for example, who will need care. That's a pull factor. Opportunities in the reconstruction and rehabilitation in Ukraine. Those are going to be pull factors as well. Push factors from here to Ukraine, maybe not so much. I can't say it's a very much of an individual thing. So I can't predict what that movement is going to be like. Um, I don't know whether there is a tipping point, uh, Philip. I don't know if there's a tipping point that is time based. After so many years, how strong is the
yeah.
pull got to be? After so many years, how much is the inertia playing a role? I mean, if you've got a house, you've got a good job, you've got a good car, you've got children who have been born here.
And are in school, they have friends,
Yeah, so
a
what do you do
life.
then? Absolutely. You've made a new life. So do you uproot all that for some degree of uncertainty going back? It's complicated. I wish I had a clear
Yeah.
answer, but I just don't.
It's another trial. It's another difficulty that this war that's been inflicted upon Ukraine has their citizens doing. It's just a fact of life in a difficulty. It's
Could I just add one
I
thing
feel for those people.
to that as well? Is I think it depends on how the war ends.
Yes.
If the war ends with a off ramp that we trade territory for peace, that's a chimera. It's just complete nonsense. We know that that'll last. I mean,
Just kicking the can down the road.
yeah, Canada, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal for protection, right? Look at what kind of protection it's getting. It also, this war has shown that the Western countries are, and this is going to sound harsh, but they're almost happy to have Ukraine be the borderland and have Ukraine bleed to save the West. Give them just enough support that they can stave off the fighting, stave off the inevitable. I think people in the West, many policymakers, foreign specialists, were shocked that Russia didn't take Kyiv in the first 2 weeks. They're shocked. They
Yes.
decided it was going to be theirs. Walk in and take it over, but they didn't. And I have a T-shirt with the tractor on it, right? I mean, that's
Pulling
so.
the tank?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
resilience and the incredible drive of Ukrainian people has shocked the world. And you made a point
Mhm.
about Ukrainians are going to be building a new country, a liberal democracy. Absolutely, absolutely they will. But it's going to be a military powerhouse.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I mean, I just had this chat a few weeks ago about Canada was so happy we sent 800 drones or 8,000 drones. I can't remember. You know, I think you used 10,000 a week or something. We sent you 8,000. We were so happy. Well, when I talk to people in Ukraine, we don't want those Canadian drones because ours is so much better because we now know how to build them at the
Yeah.
little paw
Yeah.
shops, right? So I think all of a sudden these foreign
And they
policy
know how to
analysts are
use them better.
exact. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness gracious, yeah. So
No, we're
so
going to be. Yeah. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead and finish your thought
no
there.
no I that the thought was finished.
Well,
The words are still coming.
well,
That's
it's
all.
just not only that, but there has been widespread talk throughout Europe because there's concern that America, especially if it goes down the road with Trump for a second time, is no longer a reliable member of NATO, and there may be a need for a Ukrainian defense alliance. I'm sorry, a European
Yeah,
defense alliance in which Ukraine would be perfect. They are the best fighting force on the continent, hands down, and they've got the experience in the latest cutting edge military technology and warfare technique. They could train a European defense force. So, this is it's not just a one way street. I think there are
absolutely.
things that Ukraine can provide the West when it comes to how to fight a modern war.
I think you're absolutely right. This war has changed the. And I'm not a historian of war, so I just want to be really clear about that.
Fair
But
enough.
when I look at this war, I'm reminded of way back in medieval times. It's like when the British archers uh, took the field against the old knights. It was swords and spears, and then it was the longbow. And the longbow was a technology that vaulted the British ahead of everybody else, and then other nations took it. And then the next one was, of course, the use of artillery, and Napoleon was the master of the use of artillery. So, and Ukraine is doing this technological innovation on the fly, and this asymmetrical kind of warfare, a small state against a behemoth state, is asymmetrical warfare, and they're doing a great job at it. So, and it's because they're changing the way that war is engaged, and they're mastering the tools that underlie that engagement. So, as I look at the way how war has changed across the centuries, I see this as an innovative change. When you can knock out the a Russian fleet out of the back sea and you don't have a navy, now that is really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and making Sevastopol, the cause of so much of this war, no longer viable. So I think
Exactly.
I think you bring up these very good points. But as much as the Ukrainians say our drones are better, thank you Canada, but we're doing fine. They still need some stuff that they can't provide
Absolutely.
here, that they can't develop here.
Absolutely.
They need armor. They need they need shells more than anything else. They need shells. Canada has been, a very strong supporter in terms of kit, actual, tangible things that you send over there. Are you satisfied with what Canada has done? Do you want them more? Where is your criticism, and where do you think we've been getting it right when it comes to these tangible things for help?
Okay, I think that's a complex question. I'll try to pull it apart in little bits.
Again,
Well, of course, sir, we live in a complex world.
we
So
do indeed.
if you look at humanitarian aid to Ukraine, Canada has stepped up quite a bit. They're billions of dollars. It's not at where I would like to see it. When we look at GDP support for Ukraine, or percentage support for Ukraine as a percentage of GDP, we're sort of in the last third of the pack. So I'd like to see us really increase that. We've had some just no excuses for that. You can see the frustration in my voice. We promised a
Mm.
Patriot missile system to Ukraine years and years ago, still hasn't been delivered. Ukraine needs munitions badly, badly, badly. Our capacity for ramping up our internal munitions production so that we could both share munitions with Ukraine, but also replenish our own stockpiles has been bogged down in bureaucratic red tape for years. Can't understand how we can't get our act together. It shouldn't be that hard to make shells, for crying out loud. We have the capacity, just hasn't been. The procurement has not been what it should be. So we've had our problems there, and I think we have to do a lot better. And I just think we just need a little bit stronger leadership to cut through some of this bureaucratic red tape. On the other side, I think we've been doing some pretty good things. People probably don't know, but I give credit where credit is due. Krista Freeland, who's our Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, is Ukrainian. She has pushed and pushed and pushed within cabinet for more aid for Ukraine. She has been very involved in the work that's been done on freezing and seizing Russian assets and using that money to bring back for Ukraine. Canada was very much involved in creating the International Monetary Fund account for assistance to Ukraine, which has brought in billions and billions and billions of dollars through the IMF. So there's a lot of stuff that's happened behind the scenes. And Canada had a military presence in training Ukrainian troops through Operation Unifier prior to this last phase of the war, when Russia invaded Donbass and Crimea. Ukraine actually called on Canada
Back in 2014.
That's right, and so we did have a small role to play in terms of helping train the Ukrainian troops, and then they took it from there. So and we've had a long history of working in democratic reform, particularly in the judicial system. Canada has had a long-standing relationship with Ukraine in training judges and lawyers to work in a judicial system reform capacity as well. So I think we've done some good things. I think we really, really need to do more. My worry is we are suffering from war fatigue. And the second thing is that the Russian propaganda and disinformation that we have had when we first started this, we were chatting about, has become more and more ramped up and really pushing Canadians to say, well, we want to give less support to Ukraine and use that money for something else. So we're in this interesting flexion point in time to see which way this goes.
Do you still? So look, as we kind of wind down our conversation here, I mean, you bring up an interesting point with the warfare again, the psychological warfare, the information warfare. One of the things that they have done repeatedly is push the Nazi narrative, and a lot of Ukrainians who fled after the Second World War had been part of the partisan units, which had some questionable alliances. The Poles, or the Poles and Ukrainians are on a road to reconciliation about this, but there's decidedly some animosity there because there were. I mean, this is where the bloodiest conflicts, the front lines in the Second World War were. There was a lot going on here, and a lot of people who left maybe had done some horrible things, but they love to attack it. That's whether or not it's true. They love Bandera. They love the UPA, the Ukrainian Partisan Army, which is accused of war crimes and had been in the past, mostly by Moscow. But they love using it. They don't really care about it. They use it as information warfare. You talk about the money aspect. Is that Nazi narrative still? I mean, there was the incident in Parliament, which was, unfortunate, of course, where a former UPA fighter was then subsequently accused of being, working with the Nazis. But again, very complicated. Do you also get the Nazi narrative still in Canada?
Yeah, we do, and that's being pushed by the Russian disinformation and then by the bots.
Oh yeah,
that is really push. Part of this is ignorance. It is complete and utter ignorance, and I feel badly about saying that, but I have to say it. A lot of Canadians are ignorant about what happened in World War II. We have no idea. We have no idea. That was fought somewhere else. when I look at some of the pictures that survived my family's transit through the work camps and the sicknesses and the horrors of the war and everything else, and I see that, and of course these are stories that have been passed down to me. Uh, Canadians haven't a clue. Nobody bombed Canada during World War II. You
Hmm.
know, we were over there. Not the war was not fought. We have no idea, and people are so quick to judge, even though they have no idea. I mean, the Galacia Battalion, which is with this incident around, is a complex story. Lots of people who
Yeah, very.
fought on the side of the Germans joined up with the Germans because they hated the Russians so much. But also
Well,
to
they'd
the
just gone through
Ukrainians,
the Holodomor.
no
They'd
kidding.
just
No,
gone through the Holodomor. Everybody
absolutely.
knew somebody who had been starved to death by Stalin. So you
Absolutely.
get either you got the invading Nazis who are reprehensible human beings, or you've got, I mean,
And everybody
stuck
that
in the
served
middle.
in the German army wasn't the Nazi.
Also true.
You know?
You know what I overheard one time in a market here, Senator, was I overheard an old couple talking about the war, the Second World War, and they said, well, the Germans brought chocolate at least, whereas the only thing Moscow brought was repression and death and starvation and cruelty and
well,
oppression, denying you your language, denying you your identity.
well, absolutely. I mean,
That's both equally horrible.
when the Germans moved in, they were hailed as liberators at the beginning, and then people, oh,
Yeah,
these guys aren't liberating. They're just
yeah.
a different wolf in a different kind of sheep's clothing. But the complexities are incredible. Like when my Jido was alive, and he would tell me stories when I was young about how his family survived. It's just unbelievable.
Do
He
you have
dug.
one? Do you have one that you can tell me? A
Sure. I
short
mean,
one?
they dug a hole in the woods near the farmhouse, and they slept every night in this hole because they weren't sure if the German soldiers were coming through, the partisans were coming through. When the Russians came through, it was just unbelievable. And then they were faced with the choice. Either they were rounded up by the Germans, you could be shot, or you could get on a train and get taken to Germany and put into a work camp. That was your choice. Now you tell me how you would choose. No
Yeah.
Canadian has a clue about it. When they would sleep, they would wrap bread in burlap bags in case someone came and pulled them out at night. They would have bread with them. Canadians haven't got a clue what this was like.
Well, so of course they would flee from that kind of persecution, from
Yeah.
Moscow's persecution. I don't know why people still make this about NATO expansion or
Well,
some other
that's the Putin line, right?
excuse. Yeah, it's all the Russian but the people who still absorb that kind of propaganda, not understanding the history of you know. But don't you see? I mean, this was happening. The first wave of Ukrainians that came to Canada were in the 1890s, as we
That's right.
already discussed.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
weren't fleeing. They weren't fleeing Putin.
No.
They weren't fleeing the Soviet Union.
No.
They were fleeing the constant through line of what Russia and Moscow does to Ukrainians. And I can tell you, Senator, from on the ground here in Kiev, it ain't going to happen again. This is it. This is the last Ukrainian war of independence. And we're going to see the emergence of an amazing country on the continent that will hopefully, with the assistance that Canada is providing, the West is providing, not only in military terms, but I think doing the judicial system is fantastic. As Zelensky himself has said, Canada it's almost like a relative, is the way he refers to Canada. So I hope for very strong, good ties to remain between Canada and Ukraine. I suspect they will. Is there anything else you'd like to say to my audience as we kind of close out here about what they need to be looking at when it comes to Western support for Ukraine?
I just want to tell your audience that you are living in the worst of times and the best of times. It's that Charles Dickens novel, Tale of Two Cities. It was the worst of times. It was the best of times. It's how it starts. the worst of times is this horrific war and the death and destruction, the uncertainty, and the toll that takes on everybody. And I hear that from my family members. The best of times is that you would have to really go through history in a critical way to find a better leader of a country who, yeah, everybody has baggage. Nobody's perfect. But this is a person, Yatut, I'm here. Give me ammunition, don't give me a ride. And has been able to galvanize a sleepy, lethargic West. And I mean sleepy and lethargic West. Not only do that, but also in the face of really incredible opposition that had taken decades to enmesh itself in the West, and that's from the Russian influence. A lot of this, in my opinion, and I'm worried, but also hopeful, will become clear in November in the United States. And I shouldn't be saying this as a Canadian senator, but I have never seen an election campaign, and I'm a PhD dropout in history before I went to medicine, but so I can say a little bit about it. But with hubris aside, I have never seen a more stark choice in presidential candidates than in the history of the United States than we see now. We have a misogynistic, racist, convicted felon who doesn't know a lie from a truth, who has taken a party which was at one time a conservative, solid party, the GOP, and turned it into a MAGA cult. And all sorts of people just swallow everything he says as the truth, cloaked himself in religious Christianity as the divine Messiah, selling Bibles for $60 a pop that he bought from China at $3 a pop. $1,000 if you have his signature on it. You can't go lower than that. And someone who is in thrall with Putin wants to join the autocratic kleptocracy and take America out of a democracy.
I suspect, Senator, as a Canadian politician, you're being far too cautious. I'll say it if you won't. Trump is a puppet of the Kremlin. He is. I mean, we see time and time again his connections to Russia. He will sell Ukraine down the river if there
is, as you know, the story of the Manchurian Candidate, and I will just leave it at that.
Yeah, but no matter what happens in the world's largest or strongest liberal democracy in the American project, I doubt that the rest of the West is going to give up on Ukraine anytime soon.
That's why I think the leadership in Ukraine has been fantastic because it's bringing everybody into the fold. This whole process now is here's our peace plan. Let's get every one of you involved in working on it and making it better. Brilliant, but necessary. I'm not going to talk about the schisms and challenges of the far right and the alt right in Europe and all that stuff. That's for another time. But I have never seen leadership that's been able to touch so many places so effectively. I don't know how the guy does it. It's so Ukraine is cursed with the war, but blessed with the leadership.
Yes, and I have no doubt whatsoever that no matter what happens in November with the American election, that the Ukrainian diaspora in Canada and simply the Canadian people themselves, by and large, will continue their support for Kiev. I don't. From over here on this side of the Atlantic, that's how we feel about Canada.
Well, that's how I feel about it too.
The resolve is strong.
That's how I feel about it too. That's what the polls tell us here. I think but I also think we need to up our game. I think we need to do that. I think we need to do more. I would like to see us up in the top 4 or 5 countries of percent of GDP that we spend for supporting Ukraine, because really the bottom line here is the war is about Russia's genocidal war in Ukraine, but Russia has genocidal wars all over the world, Syria, North Africa, for example. This one is just the worst of because it's on European soil. So it brings it all home. And you can turn a blind eye to Chad, but you can't turn a blind eye to Ukraine. And so what this war is doing, it's actually forcing the West to try to come closer together in a way that had never had to before because they didn't face a common imperialistic genocidal threat in Europe.
Which is existential because they won't stop.
Yes.
We're at an inflection point, in my opinion. We either go, towards the light, towards hope, towards, liberal democracy, and as I say, the American project, which is shared in the West, or we go to the alternative that Putin provides, which is might makes right, authoritarianism.
Freedom is costly. Freedom is costly. And we have to stand up and pay the price.
Well, I see it coming from Canada, so it's much appreciated. Keep up the good fight. I know you will, Senator. Thank you for your time. Very early in the morning because of our time difference, but we certainly appreciate you coming and talking to our audience. Canada has been, and I believe will continue to be a great ally to Ukraine. So thanks very much, and thank you for your time.
And thank you for the opportunity to join you. And you stay safe. And I hope that you and yours, your family, and those people that you care about get through this well.
It's a fight worth fighting. Thank you very much.
Well said.